Well, to assess today's budget and the wider health of the economy, we spoke with the business commentator Maurice Smith and Mehreen Khan, who's the economics editor of The Times. Mehreen, so it's been billed as a budget for growth. Is it, in your view?
I think that would be a difficult conclusion to make, given that most of the growth forecasts that were also presented alongside this budget were not hugely impressive. So the best the Chancellor could really say is that the economy is not going to fall into recession. But even that might be ripped up in case there's a few more minor economic shocks happening later in the year. Medium-term forecasts for growth were slightly better, but they're also slightly lower in some years. And ultimately, we just end up with a picture of a UK economy that is still stagnating. That was where we were in November. And the only boost to the economy actually coming from factors that the Chancellor can't really control. Things like energy prices are really driving this forecast.
Maurice, I mean, it was good news in the fact that the inflation is set to come down, and as Mehreen says, we've avoided a technical recession. So, you know, what's your take on it? What's your take on the picture?
Well, those are positive factors. Inflation was expected to come down this year, but it looks like it's coming down at least as well as could be expected. I think rather than a budget for growth, it was probably much more a budget with the next election in mind. We're now probably 18 months, maybe less, away from an election, and the Chancellor is trying to turn round the public perception that the Conservatives have lost control of the economy and its management. And so therefore the autumn moves that he made and today's budget are really geared towards trying to satisfy some of the critical areas of the electorate as much as the economy.
Mehreen, is it, or was it rather a political budget?
In part, we have just published a piece sort of laying out who the winners from this budget. And the top three are probably very high-earning older professionals who get a boost to their pension pots, motorists, people who own cars who get another freeze to fuel duty and a cut to fuel duty, and middle-class working parents who will now have access to free childcare up to 30 hours a week for younger children from 2024-2025 onwards. Those who are looking for public sector pay rises in parts of England and across the UK, we've had more strikes today. There was nothing in this budget for them, nothing really to tackle the escalating waiting times for the NHS, nothing too much for those who are, as I said, classified as long-term ill, but not necessarily the disabled. So I think we can see the sort of constituencies that the Tory government wants to help. It's always given the stress on working people, and wealthier working people definitely got a boost from this budget.
Just to point out, the expansion in the childcare relates to England, but Scotland will receive money from this through the Barnett consequentials. Maurice, on this pension pot, what does this mean, and will it be kind of wealthier people that will benefit, as Mehreen suggests?
Yes, I mean, it's taken the ceiling from how much money you can put in your pension pot. It's been driven partly by the slightly disappointing detail about doctors, well-paid doctors particularly, who've reached their 50s, and it's actually better for them to retire than to carry on working because of the existing ceiling of just over £1 million. So it's aimed at keeping people like that in the labour force and perhaps attracting people back into it. In the latter group, however, that's going to take some time, and a few of these measures introduced by Jeremy Hunt today are things that have a bit of a lag, so we may not see them hit the economy in a positive way over the next 6 or 12 months. It's actually going to be beyond that.
And how much might people actually gain from these new pension rules, Mehreen?
I think if we think about the overall number of working people that will benefit, it's probably less than 1 million. As mentioned, doctors are one of the constituencies that the government wants to target. But effectively, if you are a richer, wealthier person, you will benefit from now having an unlimited pension pot, which will not be penalised for, racking up above the 1.1 million ceiling. So yes, it will help doctors, but ultimately, I think it is still a tax break for the very, very rich. Parts of the labour force are not coming back to work, as Maurice already mentioned. But as I said, things like tackling long-term illness were not in this budget. So I think it's a modest reform that will maybe lead to a few thousand people choosing to stay into work a bit longer, but it won't overturn this very dangerous trend of a shrinking labour market in the UK.
Maurice, is it fair to say, though, that the economy as a whole is probably in a more stable condition than it has been for a while?
Well, I'd say it's in a more stable position than some people expected for a while, but it's still in quite a poor position. As Mehreen's mentioned earlier, the prospects for growth are still pretty poor for Britain as compared to other major economies, especially beyond 3 years. And so the real problem, which is a lack of growth and a lack of investment, there have been attempts today to try and ameliorate some of the conditions there, but really to a large extent we're still bailing out a leaky canoe with a very leaky bucket, and there's no real sign of big recovery here. We won't be looking back on today's budget and thinking that was a landmark and it's going to change things. It's not really.
And Mehreen, what does today's budget mean for business?
Businesses were very much demanding some relief on tax. That's because the corporation tax in the UK was going to rise to 25% from April, from 19%. And also special tax breaks that were introduced during the pandemic were also going to expire at the end of the month. The Chancellor announced a relatively expensive $10 billion a year plan for 3 years of, it's called a sort of capital expenditure deduction, which will allow a company which spends over £1 million on things like buying equipment and machinery to use that investment and deduct it from its final tax bill. I think that's a very welcome measure. The part of it, I think, that is concerning that it's only been announced for 3 years, which has led to some concern that after 3 years it may expire, and therefore instead of boosting investment, it simply forces companies to bring forward investment within the 3 years and doesn't really do much for the long-term competitiveness and business environment of the UK.
You'd agree with that, Maurice?
Oh, absolutely. Capital expenditure on research and development drives productivity, but doing it for 3 years isn't going to drive much. You really have to be doing it on a long-term sustainable basis. OK, we will have to leave it there, but Mehreen and Maurice, thank you both very much indeed for joining us this evening.